right, everyone. Well, we are back. Sorry for the slightly longer break than we anticipated. I was just a little quick in my intro here. So, we are about to get into our kind of opening keynote, and what we'd like to do here is uh, is give everyone a little bit of a kind of year in review as far as tactics and techniques and procedures that we've seen that we've had to deal with in our SOC. I'd like to also invite Xavier Salinas to join us or join me. Javier, for those that don't know, is the vice president of our threat operations. So when we do MDR, which is our kind of 24/7 operation, Javier is the main guy in charge. We don't get him out too much, but he is literally one of the best cyber threat intelligence and hackers I have ever worked with. And Javier didn't come out of the National Security Agency like me. So it's a big testament to his skill. So X, welcome thank you for joining.
Yeah, thanks for letting me out.
Heck yeah. So one of the first things we wanted to cover are some of the themes, right? And we want to start dispelling some myths that we see quite a bit in the cybersecurity. I'd say mostly in the marketing side, right? So first off, kind of as a year in review, there were some major vulnerabilities that came out. Some that actually came out in 2019, but were so slow to patch that we saw 2020 and 2021. We saw these incredibly leverage at an incredibly high rate. And there's a theme here. And I think one of the biggest themes to kind of wrap your mind around is when we look at some of the exploits specifically, and this is not to throw shade on any of these vendors. I want to be very clear right now. These things happen all the time. There was some vulnerabilities on Fortinet, Pulse Secure. These things came out and had patches in 2019. For the network folks out there, I used to be a network engineer. We all know that many times network devices are the last things to get patched. But I can assure you maybe after this presentation, it'll be one of the first things you patch. So what we saw really in 2020 and 2021 at a mass level was exploitation of boundary security platforms that allow for remote access into a network, right? We read about phishing all the time. Phishing is the number one attack vector. X, I don't know your opinion. I think phishing, yes, does it happen all the time? Does spear phishing happen? Is it probably the number one vector for catching viruses and malware?
Right.
Yes. In our experience, I don't think it's the number one vector for companies getting ransomware, right?
Yeah.
X, do you want to give a little bit of an overview on how this vulnerability in some of these boundary VPN appliances were taken advantage of from the top tier ransom gangs?
Yeah, absolutely. Like you said, John, phishing's still there. It's always going to be there. Something's going to get launched, but a lot of those are more on local information stealing to sell to someone else that later is going to attack you, being a ransomware group. So that's kind of, that has been the MO for a lot of these ransomware operators, is buying credentials. Then they try to get in. But when you get these boundary security things like the Fortinet, or Exchange or Pulse Secure, when you get these vulnerabilities that kind of give you cheat code right in, they talk about dwell time being 3 months, 180 days, blah, blah. But when you have like a cheat code of, all the users' credentials to go in, the dwell time becomes drastically lower. And it makes it really hard, to detect these types of activities going on. So the trend of vulnerabilities was really rough this year.
Yeah, I would agree. And acts like one of the things I notice all the time. So in this particular vulnerability, specifically on some of the FortiGates, I think the Citrix NetScaler and the Pulse Secure VPN appliance, what this allowed an attacker to do is essentially launch what's called the remote code execution technique, or an exploit, right? This gave them remote access to these platforms. And if you pause and think about, for all the MSP tech guys on this call, when you authenticate to your VPN server, what do you normally pass that authentication to? Active Directory, right? So when the pandemic hit and we saw this big mass migration, to remote working, work from home, guess what? We also saw a huge increase in VPN usage. So what this allowed the attackers to do is many times walk into the environment as a domain admin, right? And when you're a domain admin in a Windows environment as a bad guy, it's really your number one goal. And that is the common in almost every breach you see. You'll see them come in and you won't see the actual malicious tool sets until right before the encryption starts, or when they're just transferring it to kind of pre-stage it. And so the key takeaway I like to tell folks in this type of attack is, one, get used to it, because it's a much faster time for the bad guys to get into a network, spread laterally. All this looks just like an IT admin. We see tools like NetScanner, Angry IP Scanner used to enumerate environments, but guess what? We see our MSPs use this all the time. So, detecting this stuff really requires a beautiful merge and blend of kind of anti-malware technologies like our partner WebRoot has, and tradecraft detection technologies where we're parsing all the live off the land. Then we have the kind of best, capability. I would say another one that was, I don't think is damaging, like effectiveness wise, is the boundary VPN appliances, but bad nonetheless, was really the Exchange exploits that came out, and there was more than one, right? And so, one takeaway I have, let's tackle the boundary security appliances. The exploit's a problem. You have to patch. You need to stay on top of the patching. The other thing, though, that we saw was just frankly credential theft that allowed bad guys to VPN right in. We saved a customer who was a previous, before they were a customer, was victim of the dark side, which we'll probably talk about in the next slide. Another threat actor group came in 2 weeks after this victim had to pay a huge ransom. Thank you for whoever is mentioning my microphone's low. Hopefully this is better. So what we've noticed is they'll come right back in. So it's really key. If you don't have MFA enabled on your boundary VPN appliances, you better do it. It's not up for debate anymore. X, anything else you'd like to add to that?
Vulnerability management. I know it's kind of I don't see many MSPs out there with a big vulnerability management program, but that really needs to, and it doesn't have to be complex. You don't have to be scanning every single internal one. It's mainly about, what's my boundary risk? What do I have on the internet? Unfortunately, we still see daily, RDP open to the internet. It's unfortunate, but you just got to get in the know of, what do you have out there on the internet? Because that's going to be the first thing that someone attacks.
Right. And X, I think that's a good tee up for the next kind of vulnerability I wanted to discuss. So, another PSA for us to our community on the call is you have to, I don't care what your customers, you have to on RDP. Literally, there are hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of customers of ours we alert every week that still do this. And really, you're playing with fire at this point. You're playing with your reputation, the viability of your customers' network. And while we have an amazing track record at stopping this, the time from someone getting into encryption is really short in this case.
Yeah,
and
there's no 180 day dwell time. That's for sure.
Yeah. And so leading on to that, this leads me to the next area and kind of PSA I'd like to get. So this Exchange exploit that came out, right? It was particularly nasty. It allowed immediate remote code execution technique. We saw the day Microsoft actually announced this. I think it had been exploited for months prior, to be clear. But the day they announced it, there was mass exploitation. We had to deploy code immediately to make sure we could pick up on this and stop it. And really what it left was essentially a backdoor waiting for another threat actor, to come in, whether they were selling this off, they wanted to come in for espionage intelligence or really for ransomware. But here's one takeaway. This affected on-prem Exchange. There is, having previously, before getting into hacking, been a network engineer, DMZs were always a normal design technique for a boundary of a network. That's where you put some of your servers that have to interface with the outside world. In 2021, my opinion is that these need to go. They need to go away. They need to stop. And it's not because if configured perfectly, they're fine. It's because most people misconfigure them. And you end up leaving a hole you didn't realize to get into your network. And this is honestly what made this Exchange exploit effective for the bad guys. Javier, anything you want to kind of shine a light on with the Exchange attacks?
Outside, one of the bigger things is too that I noticed coming out of this was that web shell detection is not the best for a lot of the commodity products out there. I don't even think we got. I mean, it took a long time before we even got one. We saw one, detection from like a third-party product for a web shell. And it really shows how web shells aren't the easiest to detect. They're not as like fingerprintable, I guess. to a piece of software. So I thought that was a very interesting takeaway from this going on with the Exchange vulnerabilities.
Okay. Yeah, I totally agree. It was a tricky one. I know we were hustling to make sure we were prepped for that. And I don't think we had any customers successfully hit that way. So the next area we'd like to kind of cover, which was the big event, I think the Friday before the 4th of July, was the breach that unfortunately affected on-prem Cassava VSA servers. If you go and check the Slack forums and things like that in the MSP community, you'll notice we're the first security company to pick up on this. And it is our worst fear, to be honest. An RMM platform or any, frankly, cloud platform that has an agent on the endpoint that can execute code, it's a fantastic tool. You have to have it in MSP, but when it's co-opted, it's bad fast. I can tell you, what we had to do in our customer base, because we had a lot of these. As soon as we realized, oh my gosh, this is a 0-day, or it doesn't matter if it was perfectly classified as 0-day or there's any advanced knowledge, it was new to everyone. This was a case where we had to move as fast as we can to go ahead and take all those devices offline proactively. Again, moving to the cloud doesn't necessarily make you hack proof. What you're going to find is the hackers will shift their tactics and start working to find more vulnerabilities in cloud platforms. So that's why if you're a company out there that develops their own custom software, I think one of the most important programs you can have in place is really an application penetration testing. This isn't like, I want to break into the network. This is testing the application. One thing we're going to talk about quite a bit in our podcast later today is new areas for vulnerability research we think need some attention in the community, really because we as a community need to get ahead of, kind of where the hacker's attention is going to go. Today, there's still so much turf for the bad guys to cover in traditional Windows domain environments. You're going to continue to see that hit, but you'll probably watch some massive scale notable events. So that was a bit of the tactics that we saw. I think the big takeaway here is many of them were targeting a means to get immediate access into a Windows domain environment. So when you're a defender, you need to think not, I've built this whole moat, I've put all these automated security tools. You need to plan for when someone gets in, period. Whether it comes from phishing, whether it comes from stolen VPN creds, whether it comes from exploits on your boundary appliances, you need to do regular boundary vulnerability scanning to make sure you don't have holes in your firewall you left open to get something done once and forgot to close it, or you have unpatched vulnerable systems. The vast majority of every breach we stop is entirely preventable with good IT hygiene. That's a key takeaway I wanted to highlight here. Another thing we wanted to cover is just some of our more notable saves that we went through, and also to dispel some myths, right? On as far as, I'm so small, no one would ever target me. When it comes to ransomware groups, the targeting tends to go two ways, right? There tends to be continuous mass, scanning from their vulnerability detection platforms to give them a target list. I think we have an example coming up here of, thousands and thousands of emails that were sitting out, or not emails, vulnerable FortiGate appliances in their creds. And that was circling around the dark web. In fact, we even had some customers in there that we proactively hit them up and had them close that. Yeah. But real quick, 95% of what we stop pretty much on a daily basis now are about to be mass ransom events. So this is the typical cyber extortion. And also in these type of events, what you're dealing with is two parts: data theft, right? Because that increases their pressure from an extortion standpoint. And also you're dealing with the obvious encryption and targeting of backups, which is pretty common. I think one area, like Javier, I know you predicted this a year and a half ago, and I know we just saw the first evidence. Javier predicted that we'd see some ransomware gangs actually not ransom, just steal the data and use that as extortion because it's even faster. Yeah. Right.
Way easier.
Yeah, it's way easier. So I don't know if that trend's going to continue in mass because they're still having some success on the encryption side, but that is important. For example, another interesting one, we'll cover more in the podcast in depth, but we saved a major enterprise, not an MSP, but a large, very notable enterprise 2 Fridays ago from the Lockbit threat actors. What's also interesting is these threat actors. X, do you want to talk a little bit about the affiliate group and a little of what we found in there?
Oh, yeah, for the Lockbit?
Yeah.
So, to peel it back for like how ransomware operates, just really quick at a high level, is they have, affiliates, and then they got the developers, and they got the person that, kind of oversees it all. So the affiliates are the ones that they hire to come in and to, kind of penetrate the networks and do things. And they provide them the ransomware, and then they get their 30%, 40% cut. So what happens? So, you'll get varying tactics because all the affiliates will have varying tactics. Some of them, as we've seen with the Conti leak, will have like a package. And I kind of predicted this a while ago. It was kind of odd. Another prediction. I was like, because we see a lot of activity, and we saw a lot of the same utilities being used time and time again. And I was like, man, there has to be a package these ransomware operators just give out to affiliates to be like, here's your hack tools. Turns out the Conti leak came out, and also, when we stopped some other ones like Lockbit, we were able to get their tools. Sometimes they will put all their, in this case, they just put every tool that they had onto the machine. Didn't care what was going to get detected.
That would be bad tradecraft in the nation state world.
Right.
But
they were not going low.
They're smash and grabs.
Yeah. So they just put all down there, all their stuff on there. And what I found out was we're able to immediately isolate the device. It was completely obvious. But when we did that, we were able to get and look at and pick apart some of the tools that they're currently using. And there wasn't much details or about what Lockbit's doing these days. So what I found out with some of them, just go to high level, things, maybe some tips for people out there to look out for, was they were using persistence methods with AnyDesk and Hamachi. I don't know if anyone's ever heard of that. It's like a pseudo VPN type thing. They had that stuff in their folders. They were trying to disable antiviruses with a bunch of tools. The ones they were using was PC Hunter, Your Uninstaller, which was weird. We saw them, but that was the first one they used, was a program called Your Uninstaller. I still don't know what they're trying to do with that. Maybe just literally uninstall the AV. And then there's another one called YDark. There's another one in there called HR Sword we couldn't pin back on, but it was kind of interesting. We looked up a lot of these, like YDark, which is like a PC Hunter, Process Hacker, Process Explorer alternative. They were all very Chinese related tools. So I thought that was kind of interesting. A lot of these tactics were kind of for that. And, they're using port scanners that were heavily used in Chinese campaigns also, which were just all this stuff too is hosted on GitHub, the best malware repository out there.
Sure is.
Yeah. And they're using
I guess the big takeaway here is this is one of the first examples where in a ransom event, we were seeing some Chinese fingerprints.
Yeah.
And that was kind of interesting. Now, we don't really know if it was nation state or not, but it was pretty interesting, and, kind of details matter in this game. The other thing I want to touch quickly, and then we're going to get into some stats and then turn it over to Paul Barnes to give us some, a preview of where we're going on the product side, is that I hear a common thing. I'm a tiny company. No one's going to target me. I think it's incredibly important to understand that a lot of times the target by the ransomware groups, it's just mass scanning, and you're a victim if you had bad IT hygiene, you didn't patch, or they had creds to get in. However, if your company's a manufacturer, or they play some critical part in the defense industrial base or supply chain of some important product, you will absolutely get nation state attention if it's something they need. One specific example, this APT 41 group, we stopped them in a 20-person customer. That was a manufacturer that made a very specialty part for a spacecraft. And this is what, to me, embodies intellectual property theft 101, specifically, from the Chinese. And what we watched in this case is we watched the threat actor came in. They came in through the FortiGate vulnerability, actually. They immediately tried to figure out who the domain admins are in the network. And then they went right to CNC machine, the machine that cuts this billet of aluminum into a part ready to fly that's been engineered, tested, ready to rock and roll. The reason they target those platforms is to get the AutoCAD files, because you have now an AutoCAD file of a tested, engineered, flown part. Guess what? You as MSPs really need to take a look at your customer base, especially if you're, kind of serving customers that have to be CMMC compliant, and really get a little sense of what they do, and make sure you have your best set of tools and managed services to protect them, because you will see them come down. So obviously we've dealt with the dark side many times. We've stopped them many times. These are the guys that hit the colonial pipeline. We've obviously dealt with the Iranians and some of our larger customers. The point is, you need to just prepare for a breach. Here's some really interesting stats Xavier pulled together once we get to the next slide here.
Yeah. Interesting or sad? I don't know.
This one's sad. I'm putting this in the sad category.
Jealousy? I don't know. There's a little bit of all of it in there.
Yeah. So X, you want to, obviously the one in red is completely, I was actually shocked on this one.
Right. Me too. The U.S. Treasury put out this report that they've been tracking. I wish they said what variants these were. But they just, keep anonymous on them. I have no idea why, but they put out payments they've tracked in Bitcoin for these ransomware groups, for over a year from September to September when it was put out. And I was like 5.2 billion total. Then I looked up and I was like, oh my gosh, variant 5 for a year has made $3.6 billion. That's insane. I was like, what why is that variant so much more than the rest? So I don't know which one it is, but it probably would be along the lines of probably like Revol or Ryuk or something.
I think the point here is went after. This is big business, right? Yeah, so business. Even though we're many times serving the small medium business market, you can see these guys are making a lot of money. It's not just the big headlining attacks. They're kind of pulling the cash register every day with the smaller folks. Yeah, and that's another statistic I don't have on here, but I've read a lot about is that the top tracked ransomware samples that are submitted are usually ransomwares that are more one-off, that are included with cracks and like hit small people. Just no one talks about them because it's not an enterprise. But that is the most popular ransomware type, is the variants that just kind of hit people at home that charge $400 for decryption. Yep. You see it. They go all the way down market and all the way up market. Yeah. X, why don't you give the audience a little bit of an overview of, and obviously we're going to speed this up a little bit to give Paul his time, but let's get some SOC stuff. I'll try to just head over this a little bit, top level on it all. But these are the tactics that the top tactics year to date that we have seen that happen. Of course, last year exploit was barely any like that, but exploit went up a lot from the vulnerabilities of FortiGates and Exchange, and then that kind of came along with credential theft. And the next ones that were the biggest ones we hit, which is our bread and butter catching stuff, is ransomware tradecraft and infected devices. And infected devices means that something got infected in there and we can't really attribute it really well. It's so early on in the attack that it was like an info stealer launched from an Excel document, so you can't really attribute it that much. So that's what we kind of nailed towards the infected deviceware. And then the ransomware tradecraft was more of like, we were able to be like, it's this Cobalt Strike beacon. They loaded it this way. This is very much like Hanseter, or it's very much like Darkside. So we really, the biggest chunk, of course, it kind of shows off, and it kind of backs up, kind of what everything going on is that, the infected devices to a ransomware tradecraft are the biggest threats out there. And then coming along is having exploits out there and then having RDP open. It really comes down to, kind of reinforces everything out there from the data that we gathered. The reality, X, is once they get in the network, it immediately looks like clever IT administration. Yes. That's what it actually looks like, right? That's what they're stealing privileged accounts, they're mounting $signs, they're using WMIC, they're using PS exec, they're using all of the lands. I'm going to hop on my soapbox real quick for, and this one might get me some hate. Here's one other massive issue, right? We run an insurance agency. We have to be licensed in all 50 states to even resell insurance. Do you know what 99.9% of what we defend against every day? These are penetration testing tools that are developed mostly in the United States, put out on the internet, and then the bad guys say, thank you. They modify how they launch to evade various products, and they go. Our security community has to be better at protecting some of these tools. Unfortunately, probably cat's out of the bag, but we also have to be better and really careful about what I call security theater. This is a case where we're getting out, we're showing really specific techniques. We're really kind of educating more and more people how to do bad. And it's really lowered the bar for people getting spun up in hacking, and specifically the criminal groups. Example I would always give is if we detected an issue in one of our stealth fighters or stealth bombers paint, we wouldn't go tell the world about it. We would quietly patch it and fix it, right? But we have to figure out as a security community how to thread that needle between responsible disclosure, frankly, for folks that are being irresponsible in patching, and then disclosure that's done to get CV credits, prop up a resume, make yourself look good in the cybersecurity space. That's why you'll notice we don't put out a lot of specific data, because we don't think it's actually good for the security community space, because the number one job is to stop bad guys. This last step, this one is a really, really interesting one, but you have to hear my explanation of it first. So if you go back to our first slide, and after this, we're going to toss it over to Paul. I highlighted in the past year and a half and really almost 2 years, the common access techniques to break into a network that result in a mass ransomware. They're almost all involved targeting some form of a platform that allows remote access directly into a Windows domain environment. The bad guys immediately switch to stealing privileged credentials. The good threat actors are very careful in what tools they put down early on so that they don't get caught. 86% of our responses in the past 12 months, there was no automated technology that was able to stop them. All right. 14% of them, which was the rest, there was a great assistance from automated technology. Now, what's not shown in this stat is how good a lot of the antivirus and anti-malware platforms are doing at stopping, initial malware that would lead to these next steps. Okay, because we won't necessarily see it. We see it. These stats mean bad guys in the network and they're spreading. So one of the most important things when you do managed detection and response, and you're truly responding, you're truly taking action to stop a fast-moving event, it is incredibly important to have integrated antivirus and anti-malware technologies. We have made, we're co-hosting this with WebRoot today. I can tell you, we have made some amazing saves. We saved a customer just the other week that had their Ninja RMM taken over. WebRoot was able to pick up on the credential harvesting that auto-triggered all of our metadata collection, and we found all the other stuff that was going on. The two capabilities together, they must work in tandem. Just throwing all this stuff into a SIEM or a log dumpster is not going to help you respond quickly. You really need an orchestrated security platform that's key. So it is incredibly important to know part of the detection model has to target the tools the bad guys use. The other part of the detection model has to target the tradecraft that is used to advance your access in the network. And if you look at the access techniques, a lot of the malware comes at the very end. That's right before it goes boom. These two have to get together really tightly. It's something we believe strongly in. That's why we love this partnership. I'm going to answer one question, then we're going to turn it over to Paul here. How'd they get access to Ninja? Simple creds, no MFA. It's not Ninja's fault. It was the MSP's fault. Hygiene, guys. Another takeaway. Most every breach we stop is actually due to poor IT hygiene from the managed IT service provider. Or what we hear a lot is the end customer leans on the MSP so hard to keep things open and vulnerable against the MSP's wishes. It's really, really, really important you focus on IT hygiene, good practices. Anything internet facing must have MFA, app-based MFA, not SMS. That's easy to get around as well. Yeah. So with that, Xavier, thank you so much. We're going to turn this over to Paul Barnes, who's our vice president of product, and he is going to give you an overview of what we've released this year and what we're coming out with next. Paul, I'm sorry, I ate some of your time. Feel free to go along.
You're all good, John.
Forget the schedule.
That was brilliant.
All right.